Hello, Capricorn. My name is Eric Francis Coppolino. Welcome to Involution, your 2017 spring and early summer reading. I'm here with some information that affects all of us and some information about how the rather exciting astrology, most of which involves a total solar eclipse coming in August, will be influencing us. But there's other things that are going on. There's a lot of layers to the astrology and the way in which there are, let's say, deeper and deeper levels of environmental background, and then the way things come to the foreground. But let's start with the idea that, you know how there are those days where you feel like you're in yourself, you're more yourself that day, and things just seem to go well. You seem to be able to relate to people more clearly. You make better decisions. You run on time. You get your work done. You don't get sidetracked by people or things that are distracting you and all that. Well, your chart right now is a setup for an extended period where you come into yourself, where you are. Suddenly, it's as if you discover your own presence in your life and you live that presence more fully. The astrology that describes that is Saturn, the ruling planet of Capricorn, coming back to your birth sign for the first time in 27 years later this year. I believe this takes place in December. And everything leading up to that right now is kind of a preparatory phase for fully engaging being yourself and being able to make the changes that you need to make to facilitate continued ongoing growth into being yourself. Now, you may feel like you're doing that. You may feel like somehow oddly you can't find yourself, like you're struggling to locate this thing known as yourself. And here's how that particular dichotomy looks. Here's the Capricorn solar chart. The way you can tell it's the Capricorn chart is because Capricorn is on the first house cusp. The chart begins at house 1. There's that little 1. And here we are, Capricorn, and that makes it your solar chart. And the first thing we see is that the ruling planet of Capricorn, which is Saturn, is in Sag. That in itself is a little bit unusual because Sagittarius is Jupiter's sign, and when you put Saturn in there, you have Saturn wanting to be Saturn, but then it's under the influence of Jupiter, which is you might say a dematerializing or spiritualizing influence. And it's also in the 12th house for you, which is a little like saying it's somewhere, but I can't find it. I know it must be here, but I have no idea where it actually is. I think of the 12th house in one way as the house of things gone missing. Like all guitarists lose their snark tuners, and all cigarette smokers lose their lighters, and everybody loses socks in the laundry, and where do those things go? They disappear into this place called the 12th house. And in fact, in classical astrology, the 12th is considered the house of things that are missing people, missing experiences, things we haven't discovered yet, and things that are concealed from view, like the experiences of our ancestors, but they are still percolating into your chart. They're still coming into your reality, and therefore, you have to account for them in some way. And now the thing that's hanging out in the 12th house is Saturn, your ruling planet. The significator in astrology that represents you is in your 12th house of things gone missing. And so much as you may be certain that you are fully in your life and expressing yourself, and I would not want to doubt that you are doing that as fully as you can do it. However, the reality is that Saturn is tucked into the 12th house, which is saying that when Saturn enters the first house, when it comes home to Capricorn, and suddenly, as if you have this missing piece of your psyche dropped into place, that's revelatory. That's a discovery. That is an adventure. That is a feeling of coming into yourself and like having those good days. And so the thing you want to do now is continue to get out of the way everything that has been obstructing you. And the astrology is providing us some clues about that. In the course of doing the research for this reading, one of the things that became clear, and I've probably written this a number of times, but like you know how philosophical discovery is, like you can discover things over and over again. And what occurred to me is the incredible importance that the archetype of Capricorn has on family and household as its source of identity. And this places a priority in your life, but it also makes it challenging to get away from that orientation and to find your own orientation, even when you have great reasons to do it. And you have two really good reasons to do it. First of all, Pluto is working its way through your sign, your first house, and depending on when in the sign Capricorn you were born, what degree, what day you were born, Pluto may not yet have made its conjunction to your sun. If you're let's see if I can do this by days. If you're born between approximately January 10th and January 20th, right at the very end, last decanate, the last third of Capricorn, you have not completed this process. And the later you are, the less likely it is that you've even started it, although one of the things that is true is that there's often inner planets that follow the sun pretty closely, and often they can be close to the sun, and so you may have had Pluto making conjunctions to those planets, engaging its complete transformative power. However, even if we only consider Capricorn itself as an archetype, and one of the things you discover as a horoscope writer is that signs are sensitive. The whole sign is a kind of a living entity that is influenced by ingresses and by peak events of planets. You've had Pluto going through your sign for 10 years, and you may think, that's a long time, that's old news, or I wish this shit would be over. And the thing about Pluto is we want it to go slowly. We want the transformative power of Pluto to proceed at a predictable, calculable pace that does not inflict too much change too fast. That does not, shock you into anything. Now you might be thinking, oh, that's good. I've been shocked into a lot of things the past few years. My whole life has been the story of shock. But I would propose to you that actually Pluto is moving at a sufficiently slow pace, and it is slowing down in its orbit, by the way, taking appreciably more years to go through a sign than it did, say, for example, during the Pluto and Scorpio era of the 1980s. This process is alive and well for you, and it is going to keep going because we've had several important peaks of Pluto and Capricorn. When Pluto first arrived, began with a peak, began with the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great American Recession and the election of Obama in the midst of all that. The second peak was a series of events that took place between approximately 2011 and 2015. That was the Uranus-Pluto square. Now we're in another peak, not involving Pluto, but then what happens is Pluto continues to work its way through Capricorn, and it will make a series of squares to even slower moving Eris. This is like 2020 to 2018 to 2022, basically, we start to get into this territory, and it lasts into the 2020s. And incidentally, this is the United States Pluto return as well. And so there's going to be a lot of moving and a lot of shaking. Now, you're accustomed to a lot of moving and a lot of shaking, and this is particularly true where your relationship to your family is concerned. Now, one of the ways I can tell that you have such a strong investment in your family, apart from the many Capricorns I've known and loved, who seem to be among the most devoted people to their families, assuming they still have a relationship with their family. And I've noticed many will do anything in their power to maintain that relationship in any which way, even if it means driving 16 hours every week or something to go visit someone in a remote city, to make that 8-hour trip back and forth for years. We'll do that. But astrologically, the way this shows up, and this may provide you with a little bit of insight, is that the sign Aries is on your 4th solar house. The 4th house is the foundation we stand on. It's also the security base. It's also the family of origin household, how you experience the family of origin household, and what that says about your ability to feel safe and secure now at this stage of your life as an adult, not as a child. And so when we look at this and we see that Aries is there, I mean, we remember that Aries is the sign. See, Aries, 4th house, that's there. Aries is the sign that points, in especially in the solar chart system, gives a clue as to where we seek identity, where we seek ourselves, where we attempt to get to know who we are. And when you put Aries, when you combine Aries with the 4th house, it's suggestive that your place in your family may be the most important thing in your life. And that would be particularly challenging if it were something that you didn't want to be true, if you want to outgrow your family, if you want independence from your family, and in particular, if you want to be who you are outside the strictures and the rules and the kind of in a sense game that families play, trying to hold you to the person that they expect you to be, or that they want you to be, or that from their viewpoint they need you to be, so that you don't question or challenge or threaten their ego structure, their version of the social order, and their internalized version of the social order known as the ego. The other way it's clear that family is so valuable to you is on the 2nd house, you have Aquarius. And the 2nd house is the house of self-esteem. Aquarius is a bit of a tricky house to have as a house of self-esteem, because it is everything about Aquarius is dependent upon groups and group relating. And the first and most important group in life is the family of origin. Whether you're born to a big family or a small family, whether they were visitors in the household or whether they weren't visitors, whether they were nannies or babysitters, or your mom just kind of did that thing of raising you by herself, whether his father was present or not, whatever it is, Aquarius is the group. The group is the tribe, is the family, and you have that on the 2nd house. And so the suggestion is that your self-esteem is very much invested in what groups think of you. Now, Aquarius also describes the internet. It describes the electronically induced group, basically, right? And this is challenging right now because there is so much of people's self-esteem connected with the image of who they think they are, who they're supposed to be, and whether or not they're getting positive feedback through social media. It almost sounds childish to say this, and yet all of society is getting more and more deeply invested in this. And one of the things that is going on is that you are being compelled to be independent of all of this. And it has been somewhat of a shocking process. There have been confrontations involved. There have been attempts to make changes that seem to fail. And there has many times been the sensation of attempting to assert yourself and getting, challenged in some way or pushed back or facing the prospect of not being approved of, and this is scary. I mean, it is primal, because the part of you that's a little kid, and the thing about Capricorn is that though the Capricorn children tend to be very serious, and this is carried into adulthood, the little kid of Capricorn is very present and throughout life. And Capricorns tend to get younger as they get older. They tend to start life being serious and earnest people who have an overabundance of a sense of responsibility. Often they have responsibility placed on them, especially if you're born with a Capricorn moon. That was the responsibility, for example, for a parent's happiness can be placed on you. The brunt of a parent's narcissism can be inflicted upon you. And as you grow older, you realize, well, I'm not really responsible for those people, and I'm not responsible for my mother. I'm not really responsible for my father. And whatever approval I did or didn't get, I have to be the one who approves of myself. So let's just look at how this process has worked with, an aspect pattern that's familiar to both of us, the Uranus-Pluto square, which in theory is over, but it's not really over, and it is morphed into a second thing, which is the Uranus-Eris conjunction, and the Uranus-Eris conjunction is going to, in turn, be handed off to Pluto square Eris in Aries. And so the whole dynamic of your chart, going back for years now, we could say this goes back to 2007. We could say that it goes back to 2011. There's a lot of ways to size this up. Is going to be dominated by the relationship between Capricorn and Aries, between one sign with a major outer planet that is causing or symbolic of a complete deconstruction of your personality and of all the expectations, right? Capricorn is a sign that is in itself very much involved with the family structure and the structure of society. And so you've had now for 10 years Pluto going through Capricorn, possibly making conjunction to your sun, possibly most certainly making conjunctions to other planets in Capricorn and provoking the evolutionary process, and that often can feel like a series of deaths and rebirths and transformations that are difficult and purposeful, meaningful. They're there for a reason, and it's not some abstract reason, oh, this must have happened for a reason, but rather the reason becomes manifest. And the truth is that you never can change your relationship to your family or your relationship to society without first undoing those very things inside of yourself. So this is why, in the kind of spiritual logic of astrology, that Pluto had to arrive first and start you off on the process of taking yourself apart and seeing what you're made of, so that when it came time to challenge the influence of your family and the kind of influence of your involvement with your family in the form of Uranus entering Aries in approximately 10-11, you were already well underway. You know that there's something about you that is entirely dependent upon your concept of where you fit into society. And that's the concept that is needed to change, and that is challenging to do that. And it's challenging on a number of levels. So let's take this information now and expand it a little bit. There is a question of sex in your chart. And the question of sex is highlighted by the total solar eclipse, TSE, that takes place. Kind of get us both now. I'm going to show you the chart, then I'll come back. That takes place on 8/21 of this year. It's a very unusual solar eclipse. I just did some research this morning. The eclipse goes directly from the west coast to the east coast, with the peak moment of totality over the continental United States, in particular around Memphis, Tennessee. This has never happened in the history of the entire United States. This is an unprecedented event. It is all about about American society, and right now, American society is in the spotlight. It is in the crosshairs, and the president and all of his men are being criminally investigated by the FBI and by a special prosecutor. And so we are heading for a watershed moment where we're going to get some version of everything changes. And where that eclipse lands in someone's chart is vital to understand. I mean, where it lands in your chart is... How do we do this? The 8th house is... it has two main layers. It has a social construction layer, death, dowry, and the substance of the bride. That is to say, death, inheritance, and financial legacy, which expands into financial portfolios, and the snatching of the veil off the bride, and the daddy, grandpa, whatever, gives the bride to the husband with some money for upkeep for the bride, because women need a budget and all that. There's that kind of social construction bullshit level of the 8th, which is meaningful because society has an influence on us. But then there's the organic level of the 8th house. And we look at the organic level of the 8th, we find out this is actually about the exchange of genetic material in conception. It is about the shared resources that we have with lovers. And there's an interesting book you might want to read called Sex at Dawn. I don't know the name of the authors. There's just one book called Sex at Dawn. It's a famous book, and it is an in-depth analysis of monogamy as a biological function, and it has a lot to say about sex, historically, potentially in ancient history, being about an exchange of resources, of food for sex and watching the children and the service of hunting and providing meat and all that necessitated a kind of a tribalization and an economic unit founded around the tribe. And there's a lot of really fascinating stuff that throws all of the normal sexual narratives to the wind. However, you have Leo on this house. Leo is the sign of the sun. It is the sign most connected with and describing of the vital force, and you have this in the 8th house. You understand that sex is your connection to the vital force. You would probably say, no matter how conservative you might be, or whatever your values or views might be. I'm going to try to get a little more light. It's getting dark. I'm starting this a little bit later in the day than I was planning. That sex is inherently natural and biological, and that it is your connection to life. Here's where things get a little bit weird, which is that your 9th house, which tends to be the house of religiosity, which tends to be on the social construction level, it's the house where we have values imposed on us by religion, has Virgo. There's a lot of rules there. And so on the one hand, you've got this idea that sex is the expression of your vital force. And on the other, that's followed right up by religion being this thing that has all these rules, and those rules are supposedly like totally natural, like they fell out of the sky like snow, and we're all supposed to just follow them because some rabbi in 70 BC rewrote the book of Genesis. Right before the birth of Jesus. True fact. They were rewriting the book of Genesis within one generation or human lifetime before Jesus was born. Utterly ridiculous. And we're supposed to follow this like it's some organic natural law. Here's the fundamental challenge of the 8/21 eclipse for you. The eclipse takes place in your house of vital force. It is the death, dowry, substance of the bride level, but also much deeper. It is the house of your vital pulse, on the cusp of the 9th, where there are all these rules. And there's an indicator that you're more influenced by these rules than you may think, and that is influencing your ability to be independent, which is something you have worked very hard for. But if you strive to be independent and you do not account for the need for sexual independence, all the other forms of independence are a complete ruse. You can be the most liberated woman in the world and believe in freedom and women are their own property and all that stuff, and then you suddenly might find yourself in a marriage where there all the rules are thrown right back on you, and you can't even socialize. In the case of a great many marriages, so there's this conflict between independence as a political or theoretical statement and sexual independence. And there is thankfully this eclipse takes place. There have been a bunch of eclipses. They travel retrograde. Have gone through your house of spirituality, and incidentally, there is which node of the moon? North node has gone through there. You've been in this process of grounding your own concept of spirituality. I would propose to you that you may yet need a wider aperture and a slower shutter speed to allow in more of the actual light of God, Goddess, and Source, so that you're not merely following the words written on a page or the ideas given to you, and the person said, and this is how it is, and that's how it's always going to be. So the eclipse now is the first one to take place in your 8th house now for 9 years. It's been 9 years since the lunar nodes were there, and so now come a series of eclipses across your 2nd house, self-esteem, and your 9th and your 8th house. You might say self-esteem as it gets mixed up in the affairs and relationships of others. And this is a kind of a challenge to make sure that you're actually living living the truth of your vital force, living the actual inner qualities and expressing the actual feelings that you have. Now, to do this requires, particularly if you're partnered or you have love interests, requires a bizarre kind of honesty that scares the bejesus out of most people to actually come forth and say, well, this is who I am, this is what I'm really thinking. But here's a little clue coming from Saturn in the 12th, about to be, before you know it, Saturn in the 1st for you. And that is that the 12th house is where we keep these secrets from ourselves, but it's also where we find these secrets that we keep. It is where your deepest, most intimate inner nature is contained. The 12th is a very challenging house to understand because ultimately it is the house of self-understanding. So as challenging as self-understanding is, and as elusive as self-understanding is, that is the true nature of the 12th house. But you have an advantage. A double advantage. First of all, Saturn, your ruling sign, is there. You have no choice but to actually strive and attempt to find yourself, even if you determine that what you found on Wednesday is no longer true on Thursday, and what you found out on Thursday is completely out the window by the weekend. Still, this ongoing series of discovery and kind of refreshing that discovery over and over again leads to actual progress in growth. And you know, there's plenty of open places in your life that are waiting to be filled by some new discovery of your truth. That's because Pluto's been going through your first house. And Saturn is going to come in there and fill that in, but you have access to what that is now. The second major advantage you have of Saturn in your 12th house is that your 12th house ain't no ordinary 12th house. It may be the most astonishing of the 12 houses, because you have Sagittarius there. And this is saying that once you get past the layer of organized religion, you are a direct spiritual source. And the reason I say that is because coming into your 12th house, which is Sagittarius, are 2 points not on here. One is the galactic center where Saturn is right now, and one is the great attractor right in the middle. The center of the known universe on two different accounts, the local known universe, and then the very, 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 very large local known universe, are like quadrant of the universe, are both contained in Sag and in your 12th house, and you have had Saturn going over them again and again and again. And Sag is a spiritualizing influence. The 12th has many properties, one of which is its inherent connection to the deepest levels of sexuality, the deepest, that fine line between existence and non-existence, and the relationship that sexuality has to that. What I'm saying is you have access to your sexual truth. You can also deny your sexual truth quite easily, because anything in the 12th house can just kind of be swept under the rug, and that's it. You can pretend that it's gone, except when it comes out of the 12th house and into your first house, and then once again you're faced with the challenge of totally, fully, completely living your personal truth. So get ready now. You might as well just do it. You might as well just challenge the people around you to embrace who you are. And that may or it may not mean detonating the relationships. The thing to do is present yourself honestly as who you are and give people a chance to respond to that. See what they do. This involves your family and any form of coming out that you have to them, which once done cannot be undone, and involves coming out to relationship partners indicated by that eclipse in your 8th house, where there must be this expanded moment of transparency and a moment of clarity. And it means challenging the religious strictures that have been put on you. And I would propose to you that they're more than you think, and they've been more influential than you may think, and that they tend to have a narrowing and self-critical effect. And so you might look at, where all this, if you experience self-criticism in some way, or the lack of self-approval, where's it coming from? And then check your Bible and see, or the family preacher, or the allegedly secular parents who are influenced by not so secular grandparents, or whatever the case may be. It requires absolute presence to set yourself free from this stuff, which merely means setting yourself free to make the choices you want to make and to live the life that you not only want to make, but that you absolutely need to make, the life you need to live, which to me is anything other than the full expression of your passion and your curiosity is a too much of a compromise. All right, rising sign for this reading, very important. Please try to look up your rising sign, get your birth time, and check out your rising sign. It's another important piece in the composite. There'll be more information about your relationships and your opposite sign. Cancer's reading. I think it's always worth listening to Aries in any of these readings, because it's kind of the kind of the reading for all 12 signs. And Leo, haven't gotten there yet, but anyway, big eclipse coming. Get on that canoe and point it straight down the river when you go down those rapids. Go straight down the river. Don't go over the rapids sideways. All right. Lots of love. Till next time, Capricorn. Bye for now.